All right, ready to dive deep. Today, it's ancient Rome. But not just any Roman, we're talking emperors, philosopher kings even,
You mean?
Marcus Aurelius. We've got excerpts from his meditations, those
Oh,
super introspective
oh
writings,
yeah, classic.
plus a little biography to fill in the gaps. So we're not just learning what he thought, but how he applied all that Stoic philosophy.
To ruling an empire.
Right. And to, just living a good life, which I think is something we all think about, even if we're not emperors.
True. Though I have to say, leading an empire probably had a few more stressors than most of us deal with on a daily basis.
Okay, fair point. But let's start with Marcus, the younger years. This bio paints him as a pretty driven teenager already involved in government at 17, helping people, trying to make Roman law work for the everyday folks.
Yeah. I mean, he could have just, lived it up. The source says he actually chose a simple life, loved being at his country place with his books, really into deep thinking, even back then.
Which brings us to this quote from Meditations that really got me thinking. A man's life should be valued according to the value of the things to which he gave his attention. Heavy, right?
Yeah.
What do you spend time on? That's basically Aurelius's measuring stick for a good life.
It does make you reevaluate your priorities. Like, am I focused on what really matters?
Totally. It's like a personal values check-in.
Hmm.
Speaking of things that mattered, this source lists a whole bunch of people who influenced Marcus, some really big names in Roman thought.
Each one, it seems, had a specific lesson for him, preparing him for, the emperor gig. Like his great-grandfather, big believer in top-notch teachers, brought them right into the home.
Wow.
Then there's his governor, taught him to avoid political drama and how to rely on himself.
Self-sufficiency, always a good skill.
Right.
Then there's Rusticus. Seems like he was key for guiding Marcus's character development, and that's where Stoicism enters the picture.
Huge influence. And there were others. The text mentions Apollonius, known for his resilience, total focus on reason, emotions never got in the way.
Interesting.
And Sextus emphasized kindness, living in tune with nature, and valuing knowledge, without needing to show off about it.
Humility. So important, but so hard sometimes.
Isn't it? It's like they were prepping him for something big, all these influences.
And speaking of big things, let's talk about when Aurelius actually becomes emperor. Talk about tough times. Wars, plagues, even people rebelling against him. The Parthian War alone, and then the plague that came after.
Devastating. And yet, if you read his meditations from this time, you see these reflections on death, how fleeting life is, finding peace in the middle of all that chaos. Like this one. The soul turns and moves itself alone, and whatever judgments it may think proper to make, such it makes for itself the things which present themselves to it.
Whoa. To be going through all that and still having these deep insights makes you wonder, did Stoicism help him cope?
I think that's a key question. Stoicism, at its core, it's about what you can control your own thoughts and actions, and accepting what you can't. Imagine running an empire with threats everywhere. Stoicism, maybe that's what gave him that strength to make decisions when everything felt like it was falling apart.
Like a mental fortress.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this feels like the perfect time to get into some of those Stoic principles, especially how they show up in Aurelius's writing and his own life.
Yes, let's break it down. What were the big ideas shaping how he saw the world?
Okay, well, central to Stoicism is this idea of living in accordance with nature. It's deeper than just being outdoorsy. It's about recognizing that natural order of the universe, good, bad, ups, downs, it all flows. Then there's virtue. Stoics believe that's the only true good. Things like wealth, fame, those are kind of neutral.
So less about more about who you are.
Exactly. Aurelius, he believed you should be in control of your thoughts, your judgments, not letting external stuff determine how you feel.
Which brings us back to acceptance, right? Accepting what we can't control. Feels like a recurring theme here.
Definitely. And there's this amazing analogy Aurelius uses. He talks about how, like, fire and air, naturally they rise, but they still obey the laws of the universe, going where they're directed. He's saying we should accept what's given to us, even if it's tough.
I like that. It reminds me of that story he tells about the town mouse and the country mouse.
Oh, yeah. A classic. The town mouse, terrified of everything in the country. Aurelius uses it to show how we build these citadels in our minds, seeking comfort at the expense of real peace. We put up walls to protect ourselves, but then they become our prisons.
Makes you think. So how do we apply this in our modern lives? All this wisdom from ancient Rome, does it still work today?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It's like we're trying to figure out if these ancient tools from Aurelius's toolbox still work for the problems we've got today.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the most interesting ones is this whole idea of controlling your judgments, which I know can sound kind of harsh, like you're not allowed to have an opinion.
Right. When you first hear it, it almost sounds like Stoicism is about just shutting down your emotions and being like super rational robots.
Oh, totally a misconception. It's not about not evaluating things or not having feelings. What Aurelius is getting at is how often our initial reactions, especially to negative stuff, they're more emotion-driven, not logic.
So it's more like hitting pause before you react. Give yourself a second to think it through.
Exactly. He believed we have this power to choose how we see events, how we frame them in our minds. There's this quote, let me see if I can find it. Oh, here it is. Everything which happens is as familiar and well known as the rose in spring and the fruit in summer. For such is disease and death and calumny and treachery and whatever else delights fools or vexes them.
It's like he's saying all this stuff, even the bad stuff, it's just part of the natural order, like the seasons changing. It's our reaction that turns it into a crisis.
Yes, and a lot of times that strong emotion, that's what causes us the most pain, not the event itself. Think about it. Haven't you ever gotten all worked up about something, and then looking back, it wasn't even that big of a deal?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
I'm a master at catastrophizing, turning tiny things into huge dramas.
Don't we all? It's human nature. But Aurelius would say we can train ourselves to see things more objectively, less emotionally charged. Instead of letting feelings run the show, take a step back, examine your thoughts, choose a calmer response.
So instead of freaking out thinking it's the end of the world, try to see it differently, like a challenge to overcome.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective, being able to step back and reframe, that can make a huge difference. Remember, Stoicism, it's about finding that inner peace even when things are chaotic. By controlling your judgments, you gain control over how you feel inside, even when the world feels unpredictable.
That makes sense. But how do we actually DO that? Train ourselves to not react so much. It seems hard.
Well, Aurelius has a couple of practices that might help. One is reminding yourself that everything is temporary. He always thought about how short life is. He even said, the whole earth, too, is a point, to show how vast time is and how small our existence really is.
Like zooming out to see the big picture. Makes your problems feel smaller. Yeah.
Exactly. Another thing he suggests is focusing on what's actually in your control, what you can influence. Aurelius believed that our thoughts, our intentions, the actions we take, those are the only things we truly have power over. Everything else is fate or chance or up to other people.
So you can't control the outcome, but you can control how you approach it, which means you can always choose to act virtuously no matter what's happening.
Yes, and that's where his focus on justice comes in. Aurelius thought justice is like the foundation of all the other virtues, and acting justly, that's always in your control no matter what.
And it's interesting how he ties this to his own life, even while dealing with wars, plagues. The biography mentions how he worked to improve Roman law for the benefit of the people. He wasn't just talking about it, he was living it.
He really was trying to practice what he preached, under immense pressure too. And that's another lesson for us. We can all try to live virtuously in our own lives, no matter what we're facing.
It's definitely inspiring, but also a bit daunting. Like, am I supposed to be this perfect Stoic now? It feels like a lot to live up to.
I get it. And it's important to remember, Aurelius knew he wasn't perfect. He didn't expect anyone else to be either.
Oh, good. So it's not about being perfect, it's more about that journey, constantly trying to be better.
Yeah. The point is, we can all work on aligning our thoughts and actions with virtue, even if we mess up along the way. And by doing that, maybe we find some peace and purpose that isn't dependent on our circumstances.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about controlling your judgments, focusing on what's in your control, acting justly, all really good stuff. But is there anything else from Aurelius's writing, any other Stoic principles that we can use in our lives today?
One that really stands out, and I think it's super relevant today, is his emphasis on accepting what you can't control.
We touched on that a little earlier, but it does feel like it's a big part of Stoicism, this idea of acceptance. But how do you do that when things aren't going the way you want? Easier said than done, right?
Oh, for sure. It's a practice. One of the most powerful images Aurelius uses is that of an archer. The archer does everything they can to hit the target. They pick the right arrow, they aim carefully, they release it just right. But once that arrow is in the air, they can't control where it goes anymore.
So it's about focusing on what you can do, the process, but then letting go of the outcome.
Exactly. And you can apply this to so many things in life. You can prepare like crazy for a presentation, But you can't control how the audience will react. You can put your heart into a relationship, but you can't control how the other person will feel.
So it's not about giving up, just accepting fate. It's realizing there are limits to what you can control and choosing to focus on what you can influence, doing your best each time.
Yes. And that shift, it can be really freeing. You're not carrying the burden of trying to control everything, so you can find some peace even when things don't go as planned.
This reminds me of another quote of his, something like, love that only which happens to thee and is spun with the thread of thy destiny for what is more suitable. Like he's saying, whatever life throws at you, even the bad stuff, embrace it.
I love that one. It really gets to the Stoic idea of accepting your place in the universe. You're part of something bigger, and your life, it's woven into this grand tapestry of fate.
Like surrendering to the flow of life. Trusting that even when things are tough, there's a reason, even if we don't get it.
And that trust, that acceptance, it can make you so much stronger, more resilient. You can handle the rough times with a sense of calm.
Okay, so we've explored these Stoic ideas, controlling your judgments, focusing on what you can control, acting justly, embracing acceptance. But I'm curious, how did Aurelius balance all this with being emperor? He wasn't just writing in his journal, he had real responsibilities, huge decisions to make.
That is such a good question. And that's part of what makes Marcus Aurelius so fascinating, right? He wasn't just theorizing, he was actually trying to live this in a really demanding job.
So how did he make it work, being a leader, AD, a Stoic?
Well, for one, he saw his main duty as emperor as serving the common good, which fits perfectly with that Stoic emphasis on justice, social responsibility. It wasn't about him gaining power for himself.
So leadership was like a way to put his Stoic values into action, make a real difference.
Exactly, and you see it in how he ruled. He was known for being fair, committed to upholding Roman law, even when it was hard or people didn't like it.
The bio even mentions how he was merciful to the followers of Avidius Cassius, the guy who rebelled against him. It seems pretty radical for an emperor to forgive like that.
For sure, it shows his character, how much he believed in people's goodness, his willingness to be compassionate, even to those who'd wronged him.
And he also seems to have been pretty humble, not something you always see in people with that much power.
His meditations are full of reflections on how fleeting fame and power are. He really understood that all that stuff is external, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
Pretty refreshing, isn't it? He wasn't all caught up in the show of being emperor. He cared more about living a good life.
Exactly. And he believed that true leadership, it comes from setting an example, from living those principles. It wasn't about bossing people around, it was about inspiring them.
It's a good reminder that even those at the top can choose to act with integrity, with compassion. And those choices, they have an impact.
Totally. What Aurelius did, it wasn't just important in his time, it's continued to inspire people for centuries.
Yeah. It's pretty wild to think about how long-lasting his ideas are. Here we are, all these years later, still finding wisdom and guidance in his writing.
The power of timeless truths, huh? The specific stuff Aurelius dealt with, wars, disease, political drama, it might seem far away to us now, but underneath the human struggles, those are the same. We all wonder about what our lives mean, our purpose, how to be good. And what Aurelius offers through Stoicism, it's a way to figure that out. With grace, resilience, a sense of peace.
It's like he's giving us this compass to help us navigate life's messiness.
I love that analogy.
Well, we've reached the end of this part of our deep dive, but when we come back, we'll wrap up our exploration of Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism. We'll talk about his legacy, what we can learn from this amazing philosopher king. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Marcus Aurelius. It's been quite a journey, right? Starting with this picture of an emperor, and then along the way, it felt like we really got to know a man grappling with some really deep questions.
It's true. We've talked about so much, his early life, the people who influenced him, those core Stoic principles that shaped his worldview. And we've even tried to imagine how we could use those ideas today.
Yeah, pretty cool to think about. So as we think about Aurelius's legacy, why do you think his words still resonate with people centuries later? What is it about meditations that keeps people coming back to it?
I think it's his honesty. Aurelius wasn't writing some big, detached philosophy book. It's personal, reflecting on what it means to be human, to face tough stuff and try to find meaning. He wasn't just talking about it, he was living it. as emperor, dealing with wars, famine, all that political instability, and all the while trying to figure out how to be a good leader, a good man.
It's that struggle, trying to find something more that makes him relatable even though he lived in a totally different world.
Exactly. He dealt with the same human questions we all ask. How do we handle setbacks? What's our purpose? How do we deal with knowing we're going to die? And his answer through Stoicism, it offers a way to go through those things gracefully with resilience, a sense of inner peace.
He reminds us that even when things feel chaotic, we still have a choice in how we react. We can choose to focus on what WE can influence, on doing the right thing even when it's tough.
And he does it all without being arrogant about it. There's this humility in his writing. You can tell he knew he was on his own journey, always learning, always trying to improve. He wasn't preaching, he was sharing, like a fellow traveler.
It's funny, you wouldn't think an emperor would be someone you could relate to, but Aurelius, he's so human.
Amazing, isn't it? And the most powerful man in the world, and yet in his writing, you see this vulnerability, this awareness of his own flaws. It makes him even more fascinating, and I think that's why people still connect with him.
He's not just telling us what to do, he's showing us that it's possible to find wisdom, to find peace, even when things are crazy. And that living a good life, it's a journey. It's not about reaching some endpoint.
And he wants us to embrace that journey, to be brave when we face challenges, to be compassionate, to never stop growing, learning, trying to be better.
I love that. And speaking of being better, I have to bring up that quote again, the one that's like, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one.
Such a good one. A real call to action. It's not enough to just talk about philosophy, we have to live it.
So true. We can't just read Aurelius's words and agree with them. We have to actually do something with them.
Exactly. And that to me is the biggest takeaway from our time with Marcus Aurelius. He's not just giving us information, he's offering us a way to be in the world, a path towards a life with more meaning.
Well said.
Hmm.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. What do you think, if Marcus Aurelius were alive today, what would he be most concerned about in our modern world?
Wow, that's a great question. How would he use those Stoic principles to deal with things today? Would he be tweeting about it, writing a blog?
I think he'd definitely have a podcast.
Oh, for sure. We can all use a little Stoic wisdom in our feeds. But seriously, it's a good thought experiment. Taking those ancient ideas and applying them to now, that keeps Aurelius's legacy alive.
Absolutely. So as we say goodbye to Marcus Aurelius, for now, keep searching for wisdom, keep practicing virtue, and keep diving deep. Maybe your next deep dive will lead you to discover some Stoic practices for yourself.
Until next time, happy exploring.